You ever sit in a room full of people who were smiling at you while stabbing you in the back? That's what it felt like right there at my own dinner table, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family, laughing at my pain like it was part of the entertainment. It was Thanksgiving. Our first one hosting in the house Micah and I had saved for 3 years to buy. I'd spent the entire week planning, marinating, roasting, decorating, even printing little place cards with gold foil letters like something out of a Hallmark movie. I wanted this dinner to feel like love, like unity, like I mattered. Instead, it turned into the moment my whole life cracked open. We were just finishing dessert when Micah, my husband, my partner of 8 years, leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his whiskey, and said, "You don't even know who the real father is." At first, I thought I misheard him. I laughed awkwardly, thinking it was some kind of weird joke. But then I looked across the table at his mother, Darlene, and saw her smile. Not a kind smile. The kind people give when they finally hear what they've been thinking all along. She chuckled. "That boy doesn't even look like you, Micah." And just like that, the table erupted in laughter. His aunt, his brother, even my own sister Nana looked stunned, but silent. It all happened so fast. The sound of their laughter hit me like a slap. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. Because I could see in their eyes that they believed it. Micah didn't defend me, didn't laugh and say, "Y'all are ridiculous." He just took another drink and smirked. I remember feeling my stomach twist. My throat tightened, and my hands were suddenly cold. I looked to my son, Cairo, who was sitting right next to me. He had stopped eating. His fork was down. His face was still. He heard it, every word. And while they were laughing, something in me was breaking. I had spent years proving myself to Micah's family. Darlene had never liked me, never hid it either. Said I acted too perfect, like I was pretending to be better than everyone. Truth is, I was just trying to survive. I was 24 when I met Micah. I didn't come from money. I worked 2 jobs trying to get through nursing school. And Micah came in like a rescue boat. Charming, generous, confident. My dad, Reggie, didn't trust him from the start. But I wanted so badly to believe I'd finally found someone who chose me. And maybe at first he did. But over time, Micah became someone else. All cold, distant, always criticizing, always making me feel like I owed him something. But I stayed, for Cairo, for the family I thought I was building, and now, in one casual sentence, he had shattered everything in front of my son. But before I could even open my mouth, Cairo did something I'll never forget. He stood up. My little boy, 7 years old, skinny in his blue plaid shirt, the same one he insisted on wearing because he said it made him look like a gentleman. He stood up, pushed his chair back, and said, clear as day, "Actually, I know who he is." The room went silent. I didn't even breathe. Darlene stopped smiling. Micah's glass froze midair. All eyes turned to Cairo. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. He had heard every joke, every insult, every whispered judgment. They thought he was too young to understand. He understood perfectly, and he was about to speak his truth. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Calm, steady, too grown for a child his age. I reached for his hand, but he pulled it away gently. He wasn't done, and neither was this story. The funny thing about pain is sometimes you don't even know you're carrying it until you're sitting in a room with people who keep handing you more. Thanksgiving was supposed to be a fresh start, a celebration. Our first big holiday in the house Micah and I bought last spring, a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet Georgia suburb. Our dream. I remember walking through it during the open house, barefoot on the hardwood floors, imagining Cairo running down the hallway with his toy sword, yelling, "Our dragon attack!" It was the kind of home that made you believe things were finally coming together. So I poured my whole heart into this dinner. From the cinnamon candles in the entryway, to the playlist, humming soft jazz in the background, down to the folded cloth napkins and gold-rimmed dishes I borrowed from my Auntie Joyce. I wanted them to see that I belonged, that I was worthy of being part of this family. That morning I woke up at 5 a.m., kissed Cairo's forehead while he slept, and tiptoed into the kitchen. I prepped the turkey, baked the sweet potato pies from scratch, even whipped cream by hand. By noon I was sweating and smiling, pretending I wasn't exhausted. When guests started arriving, it felt like opening night. Darlene was first through the door, and wearing that thick perfume that always made me sneeze, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She kissed Cairo and barely looked at me. "Oh, you went with a store-bought centerpiece," she said. It wasn't store-bought. I spent an hour arranging it. Micah came downstairs late, like always, fixing his cufflinks, acting like the star of a show he didn't rehearse for. He hugged his mother and nodded at me like I was a stranger hosting his family. His brother Derek showed up with his girlfriend, followed by Aunt Vera, who always wore too much jewelry and never forgot to bring gossip. Nana, my younger sister, arrived last with my dad. Reggie, the only faces that made me exhale. Reggie was everything to Cairo. Since day one, he'd been the one showing up, reading bedtime stories, teaching him how to tie his shoes, on coming to every school event when Micah had work. Cairo adored him, called him my main guy. Reggie gave me a long hug when he walked in, like he could already sense the weight on my shoulders. "Proud of you, baby girl," he said. I held on to that moment like oxygen. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table and tried to feel what I was supposed to feel. Thankful, blessed, loved. But underneath the clinks of forks and nervous laughter, I could feel the cracks. Micah barely made eye contact with me. He joked with his brother, talked about sports, scrolled through his phone. He didn't ask about the food, didn't compliment the effort. He didn't see me. Darlene kept making little remarks. "Oh, you didn't brine the turkey. My mama always said that's the secret." I smiled. I always smiled. That was my role. Pleasant, put together, unbothered. But inside, I was wilting. Cairo was the only bright spot. He beamed every time someone laughed at his stories. He had drawn pictures for everyone at the table, folding them into little envelopes with glitter stickers. He gave one to Darlene that said, "Happy Turkey Day," with a stick figure family holding hands. She barely looked at it. That hurt him more than he showed. I could tell. We had just finished dessert, my homemade pecan pie with whipped cream Cairo helped make, when the conversation turned and the moment happened, the one that burned itself into my memory forever. Darlene reached for her wine glass and out of nowhere said, "Micah, you sure that boy's yours? He's got more of her daddy's face than yours?" The words hung in the air like poison. Micah didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair. A smirking like this was just another episode of family banter and said, "You don't even know who the real father is." I froze. The words didn't feel real at first. It was like someone else in the room had said them. Someone cruel. But it was him, my husband, the man I built a life with. Darlene burst into a wheezing chuckle, covering her mouth like she'd been waiting for that moment her entire life. Derek laughed too, shaking his head. Even Vera had this half smile like she was trying not to get involved, but couldn't help herself. Nana looked at me with eyes wide in panic. And my dad, Reggie, he was dead silent. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. And my son, my sweet, sensitive, big-hearted Cairo, he was right there, sitting next to me, eyes locked on his father. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't confused. He was listening. I felt my body go cold. The pie in my mouth turned to ash. I was hyper-aware of everything. the sound of Micah's spoon clinking against his plate, the way Darlene swirled her wine, the scent of cinnamon still in the air, mocking me for trying too hard. Micah didn't say anything else, didn't explain, didn't apologize, just leaned back and took another sip of his drink, like what he said was the most casual thing in the world. I wanted to scream, not because I had anything to hide, but because he let them believe it. He let them think I had betrayed him, that I was the liar, that our son was some kind of mistake. Cairo was still standing when the silence wrapped around that table like a blanket. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Darlene, who always had something to say, went completely still. My son, this little boy who still slept with a nightlight and asked me to check under his bed for monsters, looked around that table with eyes that were somehow older than his years. And then he spoke again. Grandpa Reggie is my father. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. No anger, no dramatics, just fact. You could have heard a pin drop. Cairo turned and looked directly at Reggie, my dad, sitting at the end of the table. And he said, "He comes to all my games. He taught me how to ride my bike. He was there when I lost my first tooth, and it was bleeding and I was scared. He reads with me every Sunday. He's the one who calls me champ." He paused and then looked back at Micah. "You didn't even come to my last birthday party, because you said you had work. But Grandpa stayed till the end and helped me blow out the candles." The words hit the room like thunder. My dad, Reggie, this quiet, steady man who had barely said a word all evening, pressed his lips together, and I watched his eyes fill up. He reached out and gave Cairo a slow nod, like he was receiving something sacred. Nana covered her mouth with both hands. Even Derek stopped smiling. And Micah? He sat there with his whiskey glass halfway to his lips and said absolutely nothing. Cairo wasn't done. He looked at his grandmother, Darlene, and said, "And my mom is my dad too, because she does everything." He sat back down, picked up his fork, and went back to eating his pie like he hadn't just dismantled every person at that table. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. My chest was full of something I don't have a word for. Not quite grief, not quite pride, something in between. It was the feeling of watching your child carry pain you didn't know you were passing to him, and watching him transform it into something dignified. The table stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Micah cleared his throat and said, "That's enough, Cairo." Low. Warning. But my dad, Reggie, stood up from his chair. He wasn't a big man, never raised his voice in his life. But when he stood that evening, he filled the room differently. He looked at Micah and said, calm as still water, "Don't speak to that boy like that." Micah stiffened. His mother made a sound, part protest, part gasp. But Reggie didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on Micah. "You sat at this woman's table," he said, "ate the food she cooked all week, ironed the house she helped pay for, in front of the son she's been raising with or without your help, and you humiliated her, in front of all these people, at Thanksgiving." He shook his head slowly. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Micah laughed. It was the nervous kind, the kind people use when they don't have a real response. "Reggie, this is between me and my wife. It stopped being between you and your wife," Reggie said, "the moment you made it a table conversation." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Aunt Vera suddenly became very interested in her napkin. Darlene opened her mouth, but Reggie turned to her and said, gentle but firm, "And Darlene, you know better. That baby gave you a picture he made with his own hands, and you barely glanced at it. You have been after this girl since before she even said, 'I do.' Tonight you went too far." Darlene sat back like she'd been pushed. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then she looked away. And I just sat there, tears sliding quietly down my face. Not because I was falling apart, but because someone finally said what I had needed to hear for 8 years. Someone stood up in the room where I kept being made small and refused to let it happen one more time. My son had started it. My father finished it. And something in me shifted permanently in that moment. The rest of the evening dissolved fast. Aunt Vera made up an excuse about needing to get home for her dog. Derek pulled out his phone and stopped making eye contact. Darlene started clearing plates without saying a word. See, Micah poured another drink and retreated to the living room like nothing happened, like he hadn't just tossed a grenade into our family and walked away from the smoke. After everyone cleared out, after Cairo fell asleep on the couch in his plaid shirt, shoes still on, exhausted from the weight of a day no 7-year-old should have to carry, I stood at my kitchen sink and looked out at the dark backyard. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry about it. I wasn't going to beg Micah to explain himself. I wasn't going to wait for an apology that was never coming. What I was going to do was prepare. Quietly. Carefully. Without letting anyone know what I was planning. Because the people who laugh at you when you're down stop laughing real fast when you start getting back up. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, I drove Cairo to my dad's house and told him I needed a few hours. He didn't ask questions. He just took Cairo's hand and said, "Go pick your movie, champ." That was Reggie. Never made you explain more than you needed to. I drove home, walked into Micah's home office, the room he kept locked when he wasn't in it, and realized it had been left open. He was out at the gym. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Part of me didn't want to go in. Because somewhere deep down, I think I already knew. You know how you can sense a truth before you find it? Like your body has been preparing you for information your mind refused to accept? I walked in. His desk was neat. Micah was always neat. That was one of the things that used to impress me. But as I started looking, not snooping, just looking, the way you look when someone has accused you of lying and suddenly you realize there might be receipts on them instead, I started finding things that changed the shape of everything I thought I knew. First, it was a bank notification on his secondary laptop. A savings account I had never seen. Not a joint account. Not our house account. A personal account. With a balance that told me he had been putting money away for over 3 years. Steadily. Without telling me. While I was paying half our bills on a nurse's salary, stretching every dollar, skipping things I wanted because I thought we were saving together. I stood there and thought about all the times he told me we were tight on money. All the times I didn't buy new shoes or skipped a girls' weekend because I didn't want to be irresponsible. He had a private account, and it had been growing quietly while I stretched myself thin. That alone would have been enough to break me, but I kept looking, and what I found next, that's what turned my sadness into something else entirely. Tucked in the back of his desk drawer, under a layer of old car insurance papers and takeout menus, was a folded envelope. I almost didn't open it, but something told me to. Inside was a letter, handwritten, not addressed to me. It was from a woman named Lorena. I won't repeat everything that was in that letter, but I'll tell you this. It wasn't a letter from a business contact. It wasn't a letter from a friend. It was a letter from someone who clearly believed that Micah belonged to her. Someone who wrote about their future together. Someone who referred to conversations they had about him leaving. About when things are settled. About how much she missed him. The letter was dated 16 months ago. I sat on his office floor for what felt like a long time. Not crying, just reading it again. And again. Trying to let it be real. Micah had been carrying on with another woman for at least 1.5 years. Maybe more. And while he did, he had the nerve, the audacity, to sit at a Thanksgiving table full of people and question my faithfulness. He let his mother laugh at me. He let his family believe I was the liar. He smirked while they humiliated me in front of our son. all while he was the one with a secret. I put the letter back exactly where I found it. I didn't take it. I didn't confront him. I walked out of that office, closed the door, and called my best friend Tamika. She was the only person outside my dad who I trusted completely. I told her everything. Quietly. From the car, parked around the corner from my own house. Tamika listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "So what do you need?" Not, "What are you going to do?" Not, "Oh my God." Not, "I can't believe him." She asked what I needed. That's a real friend. I said, "I need to know everything before I move. I'm not reacting. I'm planning." She said, "Then let's plan." Hey, real quick, before I go further, I want to say something directly to you. I know there are people watching this who have been in a room like that, who have sat at a table, at a family gathering, at a moment that was supposed to be good, and watched someone try to make you feel worthless. Maybe it was a husband, a mother-in-law, a family member who smiled at your face and stabbed you with their words. These stories matter, not because they're entertaining, but because they remind you that you are not alone, that what happened to you was not your fault, that you survived something real. My own mother told me that nobody would watch a channel like this. She said these stories don't deserve to be told, but you being here right now proves her wrong. You pressed play. You're listening. And if this story has moved you even a little, if it's made you feel seen, I want to ask you one thing. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, for the next person who needs to hear that they're not crazy, that they're not too sensitive, that their pain was real and their victory is coming. Hit subscribe. Leave a comment telling me what part of this story hit you hardest. And let's keep building this together. Now, back to our story. Because the best part is just getting started. People always picture revenge as this explosive, dramatic event. A confrontation. A public scene. But the kind of revenge that actually changes your life doesn't look like that. It looks like silence. It looks like patience. It looks like you going about your day completely normally, while quietly moving every piece into place. That's what the next 6 weeks looked like for me. Tamika connected me with a divorce attorney named Patricia Osei, a woman built like a steel beam with a voice like a closing argument. I met her at her office on a Tuesday, while Micah thought I was at a continuing education course for work. I told her everything. The Thanksgiving dinner, the account, the letter, the years of emotional coldness, the way he had made me feel like a burden in my own home. Patricia listened, took notes, and then said something that I needed to hear. You have more leverage than you think, but only if you document everything correctly before you make a move. So that's what I did. Over the next several weeks, I quietly gathered everything. I had already photographed the letter with my phone the day I found it. I also took note of the account number. Patricia's team ran a financial discovery process and found that the private account wasn't the only one. There was a second account, tied to a business entity Micah had quietly set up 18 months ago, running money in and out in ways that would require careful examination. It was the kind of thing that, if discovered in divorce proceedings, could significantly affect how assets were divided. I also started documenting dates. Evenings when he said he was working late, weekends when he claimed he had work trips. Phone records I was legally entitled to through our family plan showed contact with Lorena that stretched back almost 2 years. Not weeks, not months. 2 years of consistent, regular contact. Meanwhile, I kept showing up. I cooked dinner. I helped Cairo with homework. I went to work. I smiled at Micah at breakfast. I even went to Derek's birthday dinner with his family and made pleasant conversation with Darlene, who, for once, seemed slightly off her game. Probably because Reggie's words at Thanksgiving had finally landed somewhere they couldn't be ignored. The hardest part was not telling anyone who didn't need to know. Not Nana. Not people at work. Not casual friends. The moment you let your plan leak to the wrong person, it gets back to the wrong ears. and I had not spent 6 weeks building a case to watch it fall apart over someone's inability to keep a secret. Cairo noticed the change in me, though. Kids always do. One evening, we were doing a puzzle together on the living room floor, and he looked up and said, "Mommy, are you okay?" And I looked at my son, this little boy who stood up at that table when grown adults sat silent. And I said, "I'm better than okay. I'm figuring something out." He nodded, like that made perfect sense. Then he went back to the puzzle. That boy has always had a gift for trusting me. There was one evening, maybe 3 weeks into my preparation, where Micah came home late and sat across from me in the kitchen while I was making tea, and he said almost awkwardly, "About Thanksgiving." I waited. He said, "My mother shouldn't have said what she said. That's it. Not, I was wrong. Not, I'm sorry for what I did. Just his mother's behavior. He was apologizing for her, not for himself." I said, "Thank you for saying that." Then I smiled and asked if he wanted tea. He looked at me for a second like he was trying to read something in my face, then said no and went upstairs. He never apologized for his own words, and I never expected him to. But Patricia was almost ready, and when the time came, I was going to be the most prepared person in that room. It was a Saturday morning in January, 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. Cairo was at my dad's house for a sleepover. Reggie had started a weekly tradition of Saturday sleepovers where they watched nature documentaries and made pancakes shaped like animals. Micah was in his office. I was in the kitchen. I called Patricia. She said, "Are you ready?" I said yes. She said, "Then let's move." What followed was precise and fast, the way it needed to be. Patricia filed the divorce papers that afternoon. By Monday morning, Micah had been formally served. By Tuesday afternoon, his attorney had reached out to hers for an initial conversation. And by Wednesday, he had found out the full scope of what had been discovered during financial disclosure. The private account, the secondary business entity, 2 years of carefully hidden expenses, and communication records that directly contradicted the narrative he had been constructing at my expense. I was not there when he read through it, but Tamika was at my house that evening when he came into the kitchen with the papers in his hand, and his face was not the face of a man who was angry. It was the face of a man who realized he had badly miscalculated. He started talking about how he could explain, about how it wasn't what it looked like, about how Lorena didn't mean anything, about how the accounts were just a precaution because he was worried about financial security. He talked for a while, and I listened, because that's what you do when someone finally starts telling you the truth. You listen, even if it's too late for it to matter. When he was done, I said, "Micah, I want you to understand something. This isn't me reacting to Thanksgiving. This isn't me being emotional. I've been thinking clearly for 6 weeks. I want you to know that, so that when this is over, you understand it wasn't a breakdown. It was a decision." He stared at me. I said, "I want the house. I want primary custody. And I want full financial disclosure on everything your attorney tries to shield. Patricia already knows what to look for." I stood up, put my mug in the sink and said, "Also, Cairo wants to know if he can stay an extra night at Reggie's tonight." I told him probably yes. I walked out of the kitchen and went upstairs. And for the first time in maybe years, I felt like I could breathe. If I thought Darlene would fade quietly into the background, I didn't know her well enough, which, after all those years, maybe I still didn't. About 2 weeks into the separation, I got a call from Nana. She told me Darlene had been talking, not just to family, to mutual friends, to people in our church community, to anyone who would listen. The story Darlene was telling was that I had broken up the family, that I had been hiding things from Micah for years, that Cairo wasn't even his. She was still pushing that I had finally shown my true colors, and Micah was the victim. I want to be honest. That hurt. more than I expected it to. Not because I didn't know Darlene was capable of it, but because there were people who heard that story and believed it without ever calling me to ask. People I thought were my community. People who had eaten at my table. But here's what I had that Darlene didn't: the truth, and the documentation to back it up. I reached out directly to a few people who mattered. Not to go back and forth, not to drag things out, just to make sure the real story was available for anyone who genuinely wanted it. I didn't send screenshots. I didn't post anything publicly. I simply had 2 or 3 quiet conversations with people I respected, told them what had actually happened, and let them make their own conclusions. The most significant conversation was with the elder at our church, Brother Amos, who had known both Micah and me for years. He was a steady man, fair, slow to judge. I told him the full story, calmly and without embellishment. I told him about the letter, about the financial accounts, about Thanksgiving, about what my 7-year-old son had to stand up and say in front of a room full of adults because no adult would do it for him. Brother Amos didn't say much, but at the end of our conversation he said, "I appreciate your dignity in all of this." And he never attended another one of Darlene's dinner parties again. In a tight-knit community, that kind of quiet withdrawal speaks volumes. As for the DNA test, Micah's attorney actually requested one as part of the initial proceedings. I agreed immediately. There was nothing to hide. The results came back exactly the way I knew they would. Cairo is Micah's son, biologically and without any question. 100%. When the results came through, Patricia sent them over with a 1-line note. As expected. I don't know if Micah ever told his mother those results. I don't know if she ever had to sit with the weight of what she'd said at that table about an innocent child. But I know this: she never called to apologize. Not to me, and not to Cairo. Some people are capable of saying anything and feeling nothing. You stop waiting for their accountability and start protecting your peace from them instead. The divorce was finalized in 7 months. I got the house. I got primary custody. Micah got every other weekend visitation. The financial disclosure revealed assets that were divided equitably, which meant I walked away with considerably more financial stability than I would have had if I'd simply reacted instead of planning. And on the day the papers were signed, I drove home, picked up Cairo from school, and we went and got ice cream. He got the kind with the gummy bears on top that always made a mess. He ate it completely without a care in the world, talked about his science project the whole time, and at one point looked up at me with chocolate on his chin and said, "Mommy, are you happy today?" I said, "Yeah, baby, I really am." I want to tell you something that nobody tells you about starting over. It's not as scary as you think it is when you've already survived the worst. The year after the divorce was the hardest and the best year of my life, sometimes on the same day. I threw myself into work. I'd always been a good nurse, but there's something about going through something hard that makes you more present with people who are hurting. I got a supervisor position at my hospital, not because of the divorce, just because I had been working toward it and I finally stopped letting my home situation drain the energy I needed to push forward at work. Reggie became even more central to Cairo's life. The Saturday sleepovers became a standing tradition. My dad took Cairo to his first baseball game, taught him how to fish. When Cairo started playing in a little recreational soccer league that spring, Reggie was at every single game. On the sideline in his lawn chair, with a thermos of coffee and a cowbell he had absolutely no reason to own. Micah showed up to games sometimes. It was awkward at first, that kind of awkward where you both have to be adults in a space smaller than you'd like. But over time it leveled out. Not warm, not anything resembling friendship. Just 2 people who made a child together and were committed to not making that child's life more complicated than it needed to be. Cairo deserved at least that. Tamika was right there through all of it. The kind of friend you don't find very often. We celebrated when the divorce finalized with a dinner out. Just the two of us. No kids, no drama, good food, and a lot of honest conversation about what comes next. Nina took a little longer to come back around. She had stayed quiet at that Thanksgiving table, and I think the guilt of that sat with her for a while. She called me about 2 months later and cried and apologized. I didn't need her to grovel. I just needed her to show up differently going forward. She has. People can do better when they're honest about where they fell short. As for Lorena, whoever she was, wherever they are now, that's not my story to tell. I hope she got whatever she was actually looking for. I genuinely mean that. Not because I felt generous toward her, but because spending energy on bitterness about another woman when the real issue was a man who chose deceit, that's not where I was putting my life. One evening, about 8 months after everything, Cairo and I were sitting on the back porch of our house, watching fireflies. He was telling me about a book he was reading, something about a brave knight who had to go on a quest alone before he could find his kingdom. He summarized the whole plot in about 4 minutes with the kind of detail that would impress a book critic. Then he looked up at the dark and said, "Mommy, do you think brave people are scared sometimes?" I said, "I think brave people are scared a lot of the time. That's almost the whole point." He thought about that for a second. Then he said, "Good," because I was scared that night at dinner. But I said it anyway. I pulled him in close and held on. I said, "I know, baby. I know. And that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." So here's what I want to leave you with, because every story like this has a lesson hidden inside it. Not the kind that's obvious, not the kind a greeting card would put on the front. The real kind. The kind that took years and tears and a lot of Thanksgiving leftovers to figure out. Number 1. When someone shows you who they are in front of a crowd, believe them. Micah didn't say what he said by accident. He didn't slip up. He said it at a table full of people because some part of him wanted witnesses. Because humiliation works best when it's public. The moment someone is comfortable degrading you in front of others, you're not dealing with a bad day. You're dealing with a pattern that has been running for longer than you know. Number 2. The most dangerous lies are the ones told about you, not to you. The thing that nearly undid me wasn't the cheating, as painful as that was. It was the years of having my character quietly questioned. The little comments, the raised eyebrows. "Oh, you don't even know who the real father is," said casually, like it was fact, like it had already been decided. That kind of thing compounds. It makes you shrink. It makes you over-explain and over-perform and smile when you should be drawing boundaries. Watch for the slow erosion. It's harder to see than the explosion, but it does more damage. Number 3. Your children are watching you way more closely than you think. Cairo heard everything they said at that table. He watched me, and then he stood up and chose dignity. Not because I taught him a speech, but because for 7 years, he had watched me handle hard things without falling apart in front of him. Kids don't learn bravery from a lecture. They learn it by watching you be brave when it costs you something. Number 4. Planning is more powerful than reacting. The version of me that stormed out of that dining room screaming would have given everyone exactly what they expected, would have confirmed every narrative Darlene had been building. Instead, the version of me that held it together, drove home, put my son to bed, and then started quietly preparing. That version changed the outcome of everything. The best revenge isn't a scene. It's a result. Number 5. The right people will show up. They might not be who you expect. They might be a dad who wasn't perfect, but has the exact right thing to say at the exact right moment. A best friend who asks, "What do you need?" instead of "What happened?" A 7-year-old boy in a blue plaid shirt who doesn't know that what he's doing is extraordinary, because to him it's just the truth. The right people will show up, and when they do, hold on. Let them matter. Let yourself be helped. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. To anyone watching this who is sitting in a version of my Thanksgiving, maybe not at a dinner table, maybe in a different room entirely, maybe in a relationship or a family or a situation where you are being made to feel like the problem when you know you are not, I want to say this directly. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much by wanting to be treated with basic dignity. What's happening to you is real, and the strength you need to change it, it's already in you. You just have to stop spending it on proving yourself to people who have already decided not to see you. Cairo didn't stand up at that table and beg anyone to believe him. He didn't explain himself. He didn't justify his love for his grandfather. He simply stated his truth and sat back down. That's the model. State your truth, do your preparation, take your steps, and then sit back down and eat your pie. Because the people who laughed at you today, they'll be quiet soon enough. Thank you for watching this. If you made it to the end of this story, you are my people. You believe in something. You know that what happens to regular people at kitchen tables and dinner parties and ordinary Tuesdays matters just as much as anything on the evening news. Maybe more. If this story touched you, please share it. Not just so this channel grows, but because someone in your life might need to hear it. Someone who's been quiet too long. Someone who's been smiling through something they should have walked away from. Someone who just needs to know. It gets better. Not magically. Not overnight. But it gets better when you decide it's going to. I'll see you in the next story.